Hey, how's it going?
Hey there.
Come in. You want to join us? You're definitely being filmed. All right. So go ahead and pick
Grab
up
a
a mic
mic.
and turn it on. Make sure it's up to the top.
Uh-huh.
All right. Hi, I'm Tom. What's your name and what's your project?
My name is Diego Salazar. I work with Monero.
All right,
Nice.
Monero. I've heard good things, although I heard the party yesterday disappeared.
Yeah, it kind of similar to Monero. It got a little too decentralized for its
Yeah.
own good.
That's what I heard. It was difficult to tell where it was or how many it was. And
Yeah.
all those kind of things.
Yeah.
But very cool. So what kind of work do you do with Monero?
So I do both UI UX work. I'm a designer, and I also do a good amount of community work, trying to find and build and utilize open source resources. So sure. Sorry about that. Get open source resources and deploy them so that way the Monero community can kind of springboard their own stuff. I think decentralization is only possible if people have the tools with which that they can do things that they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
We can say ideals of decentralization all we want, but if we don't empower people to do these things, which open source really does, it's really awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't empower people to do these things and provide the tools for them to do so, then that innovation is all just in the mind as opposed to in real life, which we want it to be.
So just to start off, can you give us like a little recap of what the Monero project is? I know it's trying to deliver kind of a anonymous way to spend money, kind of a anonymity, bringing that to cryptocurrency.
Sure. So Bitcoin is, we generally have a favorable view of Bitcoin in that as far as prototypes go, which isn't even that phrase is very loaded.
I'll take it.
It's got a lot of great things that it did. One of the things that it didn't do well, unfortunately, as we're seeing more and more, is that its radical transparency is good for some things, but it works against it in other ways.
Sure.
And so Monero likes generally a lot of the things that Bitcoin has done, but it sees that radical transparency and it sees the ways that it could be used against the people that use Bitcoin. And so it goes an alternative method. I guess you could say it does a different experiment, since all of this is kind of one big experiment. You know, it does a different experiment and says, okay, well, what if we make the trade-off of we can't 100% validate the chain in terms of how many might exist at one time,
which is a little terrifying.
It's a little terrifying, but we have to say, okay, we are making the trade-off that people can be private, because the big question is this radical transparency of 100% verification worth the risks to real human beings that the lack of privacy and the passive surveillance that Bitcoin would enable, just from corporations to governments to stalkers, anybody who has the ability to either hire a chain analysis group or do it themselves. You know,
Sure.
it really is. Is this trade-off worth it? Bitcoin is making one gamble, Monero is making another gamble, and we really don't know which one. People like to think they know which one's going to win out, people from both sides, but we really don't know which one.
Yeah, the way I see the Bitcoin network is in a lot of ways, you had to build it this open way first to make it work. Just from a software perspective, trying to build the invisible system first would be so much harder than trying to build this, like you say, clearly trackable system. We all know chain analysis has it. Everybody can click back through their blockchain.info, see where their money came from, see where it goes, these kind of things. I'm hoping it'll be fixed in the future, things like Lightning Network or other things built on top of it. But it is interesting to see Monero take a different approach, a different project, other things like Zcash and Dash, Darkcoin, all these kind of things, you know, different approaches, which I'm all in favor of. It just gets confusing when they start putting money into them, and then there's all this hype and these kind of things. But,
and if I could speak to that real quick, just kind of these second layer solutions where people are trying to put their trust in Bitcoin, I find that generally those that are familiar with blockchain technology tend not to be familiar with privacy technology. They are two very different disciplines.
Sure.
And understanding both of them is difficult, and then understanding the interplay between them is also difficult. And overall, I think the privacy offerings inside of Bitcoin, or the ones that are being developed for Bitcoin, are better than nothing, but they're fairly fragile. I guess, you know, walking around HCPP, you see a lot of people with masks, you know, that's kind of fun. It's an aesthetic in a sense, and it tries to make a statement. But when you've got a person with very red curly hair, fiery curly hair, you see them without their mask, maybe at their hotel or something, right? And then you see them here with a mask, in a sense, can you be 3,000% sure that it's that person? No, you can't. But you know, you can make a very reasonable guess that it's probably that person. This is kind of what Bitcoin is. What they're trying to do with their whole privacy bolt-on type approach, where you put on this little mask, but given enough metadata, which a lot of it does leak on this transparent chain, you can. It's pretty much like wearing this mask while having this fiery red curly hair.
And I would agree. It is kind of a temporary solution. And even the idea of the pseudo anonymous. If I buy Bitcoin with cash, I send it to someone, it's kind of not trackable, but it is kind of trackable if the person I bought it from, if they had a record, if they took a picture of me, or I walked into a bank to get the money, or a coffee shop, or there's cameras everywhere in the world. Yeah, I've talked to some of the mask guys, and at first I was like, yeah, this is really silly. Like, the government's going to film you. If they really care, they're going to follow you home and they're going to film you. You're going to take that mask off sometime. You're not riding the subway with the mask, are you? And he kind of explained to me it's more about the idea of privacy, that he should have the ability to be private, that he can wear a mask, that he's not a threatening person in a mask, which it does look threatening. Some of her skeleton faces and her pirates and whatever. So it has a bit of a threat to it. And normally, you associate a mask with someone robbing a bank or some kind of bad action. Whereas here, it's just, you know, my action is I don't want to show my face. I want to represent privacy, not so much that it's actually privacy.
And the fact that you have a right to do that as well. You have a right to cover your face.
Far.
Yeah. Well,
it's getting a little tight in Hong Kong. It got a little tight in Ukraine before. They're thinking about banning masks in public. Which is interesting in Asia, because a lot of people wear those surgical masks anyway, just for germ protection or phobia or whatever you want to call it.
So I want to give a hypothetical then, is like, what if it was kind of culturally okay, not only culturally okay to wear masks, but kind of most people did so. Well, at that point, you know, nobody looks at anybody funny because everyone is making the choice of privacy. And this is kind of the issue with Bitcoin's transparency, is that if you use kind of transparent transaction, transparent, private, okay, now all of a sudden this really sticks out like a sore thumb. It's like if 90% of the time you don't wear a mask, then for 10% of your activities you do wear a mask, people are gonna be like, dude, what are you doing that you need a mask for 10% of your activities here? Whereas if it's kind of the cultural norm, everyone can and does wear masks, now all of a sudden it's not out of the ordinary. That's kind of what Monero's doing, is that, you know, everyone's wearing a mask. So when everyone's wearing a mask, nobody's wearing a mask, because that's kind of the default base layer of privacy that everyone's accepting now.
I would agree with that too. With like Tor, a lot of people use the normal internet for all their normal things. Then when they do something they think is naughty or political or whatever, they turn Tor on. But that is just kind of highlighting that this is probably a problem. The same way right now in the US, the government started putting these phone calls in a special top secret server. And now we're very suspicious of any phone call put into the top secret server. They've practically tipped their hand that they have something cool in that box.
Yeah, so you're right. It's literally a sign that it's almost like inviting. It's like a big red button. You know?
And then the other problem too is, and with a lot of these things, they're very early. So you want to mix your money because maybe you're political or you're up to something or whatever, you have a reason. Then other people want to mix their money too, but unfortunately they're also political. So now you're just risking a lot of political money or a lot of criminal money or whatever it is. You really need those normal people to be mixing their money. You need them to have a single button solution. They don't even care. They don't even notice. It doesn't slow them down that much, where they send it out and it bounces through a bunch of hops and they don't know what it's doing, and it cleans it up. And then it comes back and it's just nice, clean money.
Right. But see, as a UX designer, okay, I am well versed in the fact that even adding a single button, even if it's just one button, the majority of people will not do it. They only take advantage of what's already there, what's the default to do, this kind of thing. So, and any single step you make them take towards, even if it's for their own good, most people won't do it. And you see this a lot. Let's say you purchase a surveillance system for your house, just so you can keep an eye on your house. And it's like, okay, here's the default username, here's the default password. We strongly encourage you to change your password. And many people don't. And so there's whole websites where you can kind of just scan the internet for these infrastructures of cameras, and you just type in the default username and password, and you get into a lot of them. And you can just see a lot of people's stuff. So even any teeny tiny step you're having a user take is one too many. And so if it's not the default, just most people aren't going to use it. And your privacy is only as good as the crowd that you're hiding in. And so when we're talking about, you know, Bitcoin making these second layer solutions or opt-in solutions, you know, we're all about this opt-out thing kind of at HCPP right now. If there's these opt-in solutions, most people are not going to use them. So the crowd that you're hiding in is quite small, and only the privacy conscious will use it. So it kind of puts you with a crowd you might not want to do. Now, see, I consider myself a pretty squeaky clean guy. I do pretty much everything right, above the level. So, I don't want to get in any trouble. But see, even a guy like myself, I mean, I don't really have to explain why privacy is important to people you guys, but the privacy is actually really, really important for me, because if somebody's doing some sort of nefarious transaction over there and they pay me in Bitcoin for any of my services, now all of a sudden I have this dirty, tainted Bitcoin. And I'm going to get questioned, why do I have this, even though I had nothing to do with this over here?
Sure, if the money was involved in a hack, or if it was stolen, or if it was used for something bad, and then somehow it comes to you for a totally legitimate reason, you would be in the chain with the bad coin.
Right, and
what's the magic number as well of hops until something's clean? Is it dirty forever?
I'm afraid never.
Because it's just going to be an endless cascade. If the government says 3 hops, then someone's just going to send it to themselves 4 times. The government's going to realize that. They're going to say, okay, 10 hops. That they're going to send it to themselves 11 times. At which point the government says, okay, if at any point in history, which is a really big deal, because all Bitcoin is going to eventually travel through so many people's hands that all Bitcoin will have that point in history where it kind of becomes tainted. And this just isn't really a thing in Monero. This unlocks the fungibility aspect where 1 Monero actually does equal 1 Monero. And that's just not the case with Bitcoin. 1 Bitcoin doesn't equal 1 Bitcoin. And it's kind of, if I could be real for a little bit with you gentlemen here.
Sure, man.
In HCPP, there is a lot of Bitcoin maximalists, and they like to kind of sweep this thing under the rug. See, I'm not a Monero maximalist. If Bitcoin was to make privacy at the base layer and mandatory for everybody, who needs Monero? I don't care. We can use Bitcoin. All I care is that we have some way to privately transact with a fungible currency. And if Monero is just a stepping stone to a future cryptocurrency where that is the case, then sure, let Monero die. I'm not married to Monero. It's just right now, Monero is all there is, because things like Zcash are opt-in, things like Bitcoin are opt-in. Nobody is taking the really strong stand. Nobody has the guts to take that stand because they're scared of regulation or this, to say, you know what, we're going all in on privacy with no compromises. And it's a scary stand to take, but it's a little disappointing, because you think these people would be the ones to understand that stance, and a lot of them don't.
I watched or went to I think it was UCL in London, and Fluffy Pony gave a presentation. And one of the things, this was in early 2017. I'm not sure if it was ever implemented, but he was talking about maybe implementing an opt out of privacy. Did that ever get implemented? And that was for charities, things like that, so that people could, the businesses could take Monero and still do it, by a regulatory.
Right. So actually, Monero does play really well with regulation, and this may go against a lot of things I just said, but Monero has more keys than Bitcoin does. We don't just have the private key. We have a private view key and a private spend key. So what you can do is you can give somebody your private view key, and it allows them to see inside your wallet without being able to spend, which means if somebody was to come to me and say, Diego, we're auditing you, or Diego, you're part of a nonprofit, we want to be able to see what you guys are raising, we can give them our private view key, and they can see inside the wallet, and we can be as transparent as we would like. So it's privacy by default, transparency as an option, as opposed to the vice versa. And if you think about that, our current financial system is based off of that, and it's the same way to do things. Nobody gets to look in my bank account except for me. You guys don't just get to look in there unless I say, look, guys, here's my bank statements, and then you get to see, right? It's private by default, optionally transparent. That's the way things currently run, and it is a sane way to do things. So that's what Monero tries to emulate.
And with recently, I can't remember what exchange it was, but I think they delisted like Zcash, Monero, and I think Dash as well, actually, because this slight privacy.
It's starting to become a question of all of them. Are you going to try the privacy coins? Are you not? All or none or some?
Do you think it's good for Monero, because it kind of proves that it does what it says? It's a privacy coin, and therefore that's why exchanges are kind of scared, because the regulators might come off.
Right. And I think a lot of it comes down to a lack of education, both on the regulators and the exchanges part. For example, Monero is completely compliant with KYC AML in the sense that banks are. So when I go to the bank, they see my face, they ask for my ID, and then I withdraw cash and I leave. They know that they gave me a certain amount of cash, but they don't know what I do with that cash afterwards. That's how the banking system works. Monero works exactly the same way. If I go through a KYC AML exchange, they have my ID, they know how much Monero I pulled out, but after that, they don't know what I do with my Monero. So it actually very similarly emulates our current banking system, unlike Bitcoin, where you can kind of track it hop after hop after that. And I think most exchanges are scared because they hear privacy coin and like, oh my gosh, we're not gonna be able to. But no, it actually plays along the same vein as our current financial system. And the more exchanges start to realize this, you do have exchanges like Kraken and Paraleni who are like, oh, you know what, this works just fine. We don't have anything to be scared of. Kraken has had fiat to Monero, not fiat to Bitcoin to Monero, but fiat to Monero trades for quite some time now. And they are US based, which is one of the most draconian places out there, right? And they're chugging along just fine. And regulators as well, like everything I just said, where you can open up your view key, like I don't think obviously they barely understand Bitcoin. They're definitely not going to understand this. Yeah. We need a group of people, honestly, to go and talk to these people. Like, look, this is not something to be scared of. This is something to be embraced. It helps give people freedom. It serves the people, which is what politicians are supposed to do, right? And at the same time, like it does play along with the things that, okay, so if you want to make sure you pay your people pay their taxes, well, then you can just make some regulation around the technology rather than banning the technology. So a lot of it is just kind of uneducation rather than, and people acting out of fear rather than acting out of an informed position.
Well, it's also, it might be even better for the exchanges to have the privacy coins because they don't have that potential problem, like you said, with the Bitcoin being tainted. If the exchange accepts a coin that later becomes a dirty Silk Road coin or whatever, suddenly the exchange has to take a loss because they can no longer spend or sell that coin if that kind of taint of coins problem gets that bad.
Right. So the Monero table here is sponsored by a service called XMR.2. Mm-hmm. And that's their banner out in front of the table. So XMR.2 is a service where if I want to if I want to buy something in Bitcoin, but I only have Monero, I send Monero to this service, and they send Bitcoin out. So I can essentially have the privacy of Monero while taking advantage of the fact that Bitcoin is accepted in more places. But they do not go in the reverse direction. You send them Bitcoin and you pay out Monero because people will send them tainted Bitcoins.
Sure.
And they're stuck with, right? And then they get clean Monero because there's no such thing as dirty Monero. That's just all the same Monero, right? So they get regular Monero out the other end. And then they won't be able to do anything with this Bitcoin because if they send it to an exchange, their account's going to be shut down pending investigation, right? So it only goes in one direction. You can only go from fungible to non-fungible. You cannot go from non-fungible to fungible.
Now, going back to something you said earlier, before the Civil War in the United States, we had states' rights, and it was kind of seen as a laboratory of ideas. California wants to try legalizing this. South Carolina wants to legalize that. We want higher emission standards here. You can try things. And then the idea being, if any of these ideas were really good, like in Colorado, they got so much money from legalizing cannabis that they had to buy more computers for their schools and even give money back to their citizens because they just had too much money and nothing to do with it. If any of the ideas work, they could be adapted nationally. We could legalize things. We could change the laws and get rid of bad laws. In the beginning, this is kind of what altcoins were like. We were working on the ideas, the privacy coins, the smart contract coins, these kind of things. But then I think something happened when they started getting prices, and then when the prices started going insane. It wasn't so much the idea or the value of the project or even the adoption or the traction or anything. It was just the hype. Because I like smart contracts, but I think Ethereum's all hype. I like privacy. I don't know which one's hype, which one's not. They all have ups and downs. What do you think of that idea, just generally?
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing, and it's really funny because in Bitcoin and actually in Monero too, it's one of the few other cryptocurrency projects. You can see the open source roots, where open source was never about the money. It's all about giving to the people. But Bitcoin is in a weird position where it's not about the money, but it is money, right? It is about the money because it is money. It's like one of the first open source projects where there's this really, really fine line that it has to ride, right? And if you step too far to either side, all of a sudden just everything goes out of whack. And so especially like with the hype of 2017, that line was way overstepped in one direction. And it actually just took a small push to roll down the hill, and it's going to take not a small push to go back up the hill. It's going to take almost many magnitudes more effort to put things kind of back on this line where it's like, look guys, let's get out of this hole. It's all about the money. We're all trying to get rich thing. Let's go back to, we're trying to change the world. And the cool thing is some of the people that came in the 2017 boom, they caught the vision. How many of them? I have no idea. I mean, it's probably a small percentage, but some of them got in for the money, heard the ideals, and like, you know what, I understand. I caught the vision. So they're still here. Many of them just kind of left. And it is tough, you know, where all this hype is everywhere, and it's hard to sift through all of this nonsense. And so in some sense, I can see where the maximalists come from, because they're like, you know what? I know Bitcoin is good, and I don't have the time or energy to sift through all of this junk.
And remember, the longer you're in this, the more scams you've seen. The more you've seen it go up and down. You've seen great ideas that you love: privacy, freedom, security, all these things. We're going to be the most private coin. We're going to be the most secure coin. We're going to be the most scarce coin. We're going to be the most plentiful coin, whatever it is. We've been through all of those, and we get a little jaded. You get a little like, what's the new thing? This is, oh, I've had enough of this thing, you know?
But at the same time, the cypherpunks are supposed to be the critical thinkers. We're supposed to be the people that don't just turn off our mind and apply the easy heuristic. We're supposed to be the people that can sift through this stuff and tell the people, this is the good stuff, right? And so we can't get lazy. We're supposed to be the difference, because of otherwise nothing separates the Bitcoiners from the traditional banking system. People just accepting what they were told or what they grew up with.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, now we have to ask you the really hard question.
Sure.
Are you ready? So initially, Monero came out. I'm not sure the exact phrasing, but something like, we don't really know who's making them. We don't know how many there are. If I found a special way to make them, maybe I could make a lot of them. And then you've got a real problem, because I'm just going to dump them and everything, and I get lots of money, and the whole thing goes down. What about that criticism? How does that work? Are you fixing it? Is it a problem?
So this is, like I said near the beginning, this is definitely the trade-off that we make. 100% validation for the privacy, because Bitcoin has some pretty magical maths. It does use a form of zero knowledge proofs, and zero knowledge proofs is just this idea that without any knowledge of certain stuff, I can prove a certain statement. So within every single Monero transaction, we can prove, without knowing the amount of Monero that was exchanged, that no Monero was created or destroyed. Because if you think about it, if I send you 10 Monero is, you can think about it as destroyed from my wallet, and 10 Monero is created in your wallet. And it's a little more complicated than that, but that's kind of what the exchange thing is all about, right? I give you a $10 bill. I no longer have $10. You have $10.
Sure.
So on the ledger, 10 is destroyed, 10 is created. And we can prove that 10 equals 10. Right, on both sides of the equal sign. So I want you to imagine a scenario where I send you 10, and you and I exchange a secret number. Let's say that number is 5. Nobody else knows the secret number except for us. So we show the miners that 50, because 10 times 5 equals 50. So both sides of the equation still equate to each other. So the miners see, okay, no Monero was created or destroyed, but we don't know what that exact number that was exchanged between them are, because only you and I know that exact number, because we share that secret number.
Sure.
That's kind of a very ultra simplistic way of how Monero does this. So with the magic of maths, we can do this. But if somebody was to break the math, because it's always possible, or break the implementation of this math, which is more likely because of human error, then yes, in theory, I send you 10, you receive 10, but I actually send you 20 and you receive 20, even though I didn't have 20, and still 20 equals 20 on both sides. So you can never be 1000% sure. So we're always looking for ways to improve or optimize or better prove, or at the very least, more simple math or more simple implementation, so they're much more easily vetted by more amounts of people. But this is definitely the trade-off that we make, and this is not solvable if we want complete privacy.
Excellent.
And so I guess, yeah, it really is up to the individual whether they're willing to risk it. Just like it's up to me, if I ever use Bitcoin, which I usually don't, whether I'm willing to risk the radical transparency. It's either or.
Well, and I appreciate your open attitude, and that you're not a maximalist, and I'm called a maximalist or whatever, but I'm open-minded, and I let people talk and we discuss things. And I really think the maximalist term, it came from Vitalik. It was a negative thing. He was trying to separate himself and the Ethereum people from the Bitcoin people, with a little bit of a, insult, a little bit of a truth, but a little bit of an insult. And I'd like us to see growing beyond it. A lot of times I know people that are just against all the altcoins. I hear this one, I'm like, that sounds interesting. I look at Steam when it first came out, I'm like, that's kind of interesting. I like getting paid for blogging. That's a cool idea. Maybe it doesn't work long term. I'm not telling anybody to buy anything. You make your own decisions. But I'm interested in these projects, and I think that we need to have a more open-minded thing where we stop saying, oh, he's interested in it, take away his maximalist card, shit on him, throw everything, burn it down. Because you have to let these projects turn out. We had someone on the network here who went absolutely gaga for some Bitcoin fork called Rhodium. And I don't think there's anything special or magical about it. It had less units, and it wasn't really clearly open source. They didn't have a GitHub. They said you could go on their Discord and ask for the code.
I remember these
And it
guys
was all
actually.
fishy, and I wasn't into it, but I thought it would be a good learning lesson where you could be like, watch this guy, hopefully learn from the lesson and hopefully not destroy his credibility. But instead, he went the credibility destroying route. But when I interviewed him about it, he just really didn't understand open source software. He wasn't into it. It wasn't one of his priorities or values. And that, I think, allowed him to get kind of fooled by that. And I'd hope we could learn from that. But unfortunately, a lot of people with torches showed up ready to burn down the house because you dared to let someone have their opinion. I don't know if he was paid or whatever, but I just thought it was his opinion. It's something about in his gold bug mind attracted him to scarce units. This rhodium thing had it. But yeah, they had to burn him at the stake. They tried to burn me at the stake. There's all this fire around us.
And I agree with your idea about this maximalism term. It can be very undercutting and divisive. And I honestly don't really view people as maximalists or not maximalists. I view them as scientists or not scientists. So I think one of the things that was lost is that all of this is an experiment. And if everybody is running the same experiment, like technically Litecoin is running the same experiment as Bitcoin. Sure. They've tweaked the numbers a little bit and they've tweaked the algorithm, but overall it's the same experiment. Whereas Monero is making a very different hypothesis about the privacy validation trade-off. So they're two very different experiments. And if one of them dies, then we do an autopsy at the end and we see what went wrong, right? So in a sense, I agree with you. Like we have the things like Steemit or we have the things like Ethereum, and are most of them going to die? Probably so, yeah. But we will glean knowledge from that. We can look at that and say, okay, why did they die? Were the incentives all wrong? Was, community management the issue?
It was hacked, it was broken, right. They rolled back the DAO.
Right, that's exactly it. And the people that are not scientifically minded are just like, you know what? This is the only experiment that matters. I'm like, this is not how science works. You don't just conduct one experiment in the field of biology and now like we know everything. That's not how it works. And that's
I hate to break the science talk with some religion, but it is a bit like religion. Of course, Christianity, John the Baptist was kind of seen as the Messiah for a while, but then he met Jesus and he was like, oh, I'm not the Messiah. This is the Messiah. And then a lot of people don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. There'll be another one, which is kind of, if you just substitute Bitcoin in there, we're saying, oh, it's the one. And they're like, but there's another one. And I, as much as I like Bitcoin, I'm a maximalist and all that, they call me, if Bitcoin 2 comes along and it has all the privacy features, or it has some other feature that I think I need, or it's faster, it's slower, it's stronger, whatever it is, I'm not opposed to switching up to Bitcoin 2. Everyone's freaking out now, but it has to be a complete fail. Like they crack Bitcoin or they crack the algorithm or whatever. We have to fix it. I want digital money. I want sound money. That's important to me. It would have to be locked at 21 million units or whatever. But I'm flexible. It's the result of the project, not necessarily the journey. It doesn't have to go through the thing that makes me rich or whatever. I want the sound money for everybody.
So if I don't know if I have the time, but I would like to talk about one last final kind of major criticism that's not really about Monero, but about all the altcoins in general, is they say, well, throughout history, and this comes from a lot of Austrian economists, throughout history, the best money tends to eat up the lesser monies. And that's one of the big things that we hear. So after I give my technical privacy spiel, a lot of people can't answer me back because they have nothing to come back with. So they go like, well, Bitcoin is the biggest, and we know from history that it'll eat the smaller one. So that's why Monero can't survive. Okay. So from their economic perspective, that's all they can come at me with, because technically they got nothing, right? From their economics perspective, Bitcoin will still win. But I would wager to say that people, first of all, that's a little overly simplistic, because the bigger money will only eat the smaller money if both monies do exactly the same thing. And there's no reason for the second one to exist, right? If you have shells and beads, right, both of them are both small, both of them can be easily traded. So yes, the one that has the bigger market is going to eat up the smaller one. In the case of Monero versus Bitcoin, Bitcoin has something Monero has something that Bitcoin can't emulate it. Monero is uneatable, in my opinion, because Bitcoin doesn't do everything Monero does. So even if it's the bigger currency, at the very least, there will always be a niche. But more than likely, it will become, I think, a bigger competitor than people might think it would. So I think a lot of these people just kind of have this reductionist, as opposed to an emergent idea of this Austrian economics, because they've seen it throughout history, but they don't ask the question, why does one eat the other? And it's because they do the same things. And so, yeah, it's better to just have one that more people use. But that's not really the case here with Bitcoin and Monero.
And I would just go back towards the old ocean analogy. It's a very big ocean. There's lots of it. Maybe Bitcoin's a huge whale, a great grand whale going through the ocean. Maybe Monero's a small fish feeding off the bottom. There's no reason they can't both live and continue to live. If people like to use Monero for privacy in a small community or a larger community, it could exist. If people want to use Bitcoin for non-privacy in a small or large community, it could exist. I think there's lots of ocean for everybody. But you know, the maximalist term, the fact that things are worth money, the fact that you put them on coin market cap and pretty soon you're number 3 and you're number 4 and we're competing and back and forth. I think that gets people locked into this competition metaphor. Also, when you're a bag holder, you want your bag to be the richest bag. Even if you don't think it, it's in the back of your head. It motivates you. You're out there posting on the forums or whatever. So yeah, I think that's all separated us, but I think we have more in common with Monero people than maybe with central banker people or finance people or whatever it is. So I don't think there should be such a war.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Like the fact is that we're all on the same side. You know, and if people ultimately decide that they find utility in something, they want the privacy features, then there's going to be a market for it. So as long as there are people who are, you know, who have use cases for these different sort of coins, then there is, they'll keep going.
All right. And where can people learn about your work, Diego? Can they follow you on Twitter or you have a webpage or?
They can. I'm not a whole lot on social media.
Or if you want to promote the Monero, or where should people go to learn about Monero?
To learn about Monero, you go to getmonero.org.
Right,
and that's a great, fantastic community maintained website, and anyone can contribute to that website also. So getmonero.org is the primary place to learn about Monero. You can follow me personally on Twitter. I tweet like once every 2 months, but I am there. At of the Salazar. Which I don't know if you guys are going to like put the little banner underneath us, like Diego Salazar.
Maybe later when it's edited.
Yeah, exactly.
3 months from now.
Sure. But yeah, any other questions?
No, that's great. Well, thanks so much for being on, and thanks for talking about Monero and being reasonable too. I really appreciate your
very
perspective. So, and check it out. It'll be on the World Crypto Network later on. So,
cheers.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.